one of the biggest themes I think that turns up in birth trauma all the time is women not being able to stand in their power.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the time it's women, and we see this a lot with first births, is women turning up to their first birth as the good girl. Yeah. So, those younger parts of us that want to be liked and want to do the right thing. And yeah, that was totally me as well. And that want to, want it to go well, but actually often are not standing in that fear center that says a no to something, or they're sitting in a lot of fear and can't find that trust within themselves, or they're choosing care providers that kind of treat them like the little girl version of themselves, and that's how it plays out. So I think one of the biggest themes I've seen is definitely women not being able to find or access the power and the strength within them to actually have very clear no's around what they want, or to make choices that feel in alignment with who they really are.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to No Place Like Home. I'm Jess, and we're here with Larissa.
Hello.
And the wonderful Lael Stone, who I'm sorry, it is your turn to talk, but I just want to say, fangirl moment. Sometimes in my career, and obviously I'm younger than you, but sometimes I do so much and I feel a bit flaky because I've done this and I've done that, and it all ties together. But sometimes I feel like it must look flaky, but then I look at you and you're the same. You've got all this stuff going on, and I don't for a second think it's flaky. I think it's amazing. You're a powerhouse. So it's so wonderful for me to be able to look at someone like you and go, oh, everything's okay. You're amazing. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Amazing. Lael, maybe talk to us a bit, introduce yourself, and maybe just let our listeners know, like Jess has said, a bit of everything that you do. But I think we're really interested today to talk about a couple of particular topics.
Especially your births and your postpartum experiences and how that's informed everything you do now.
Yeah, well, it actually has. I think I often get asked the question, how did you come to do the work you do? And it really is because of my children, actually. So today I call myself an author, an educator and a speaker. So I spend a lot of time travelling all over Australia talking about emotional awareness, emotional intelligence. I work with the wonderful The Resilience Project. I do a lot of work with them around talking to parents about connected parenting. I spent about 15 years working in birth. So for a long time I was a doula and a childbirth educator. I taught calm birth for a long time, and then ended up working a lot with postnatal trauma. So I found myself seemed to attract a whole lot of people that had had really tricky birth experiences. So I did a lot of work of counselling with them. I worked as an aware parenting instructor for a long time, so I ran workshops and worked one-on-one with people. And then again, as my children grew, I found myself teaching sex ed to teens for about 5 years. So I worked in secondary schools. Oh yeah, I've got many fun stories about that.
Oh my
So
goodness.
I've worked my way from birth all the way through to kind of the toddler, early years, school age kids, then teenagers. So I worked with teens for a long time. And then about 3 years ago, I actually opened up my own school called Woodline Primary in Ceres, just out of Geelong, which is a school based all on emotional awareness and choice and autonomy and non-punitive discipline, and really getting kids back into nature and connection. And
So incredible.
And really about, I guess, creating a schooling experience where children are free to be who they need to be and to learn in ways that they love learning. And so that was a huge chunk of my life, creating that. I wrote a book, had a podcast for a long time, and really amongst all that, my main job really has been a mum. I've got 3 beautiful kiddos. They're 23, 20 and 15. And I often say that no matter what I've studied or learned, my greatest teaching has been my children. It has been through parenting them or trying to parent them with as much consciousness as possible has really shaped actually everything I've done. So, before I actually even had my first child, I was a children's entertainer. That was my first company I started when I was 20. I've always been the type of person to go, I don't want to work for anyone else. I want to do my own thing.
right,
So started my own business at 20. This is way back when the Wiggles first began. This is how old I am. And I used to entertain kids at parties and put on big shows, and I'd get busier, and then I hired people. And for nearly 7 years, I had that company, which was, as a young mum at the time, I just think, my God, what on earth was I doing? It was pretty shoddy business.
You do that, don't you?
But, you back yourself, and I think your naivety works for you really well. So I had that company for many, many years, and then ended up having my second child and had a really powerful, beautiful birth experience with her. And that's what actually made me close my business and want to work in birth. So that's a kind of roundabout story of all the things I've done and where I've got to. But really, I think I've been working with families and in this space for, close to 20 years now.
Amazing. I know that myself and John did your parenting immersion course. And I have to say, for anyone out there, it is one of the most powerful things that John and I have ever done. It has completely changed our dynamic of our household, and the kids are just really benefiting from having two parents that, we were like, well, I don't think we're doing this that great.
Yeah.
So, that is amazing. I have
you.
just really loved that course. So thank you.
Thank you.
If we can just go back to, it's a hot topic at the moment, obviously, with the birth trauma inquiry going on at the moment. And I suppose me being not naive, but not knowing a lot about a lot in this space and only having my own experiences, I think it's been quite eye-opening to understand what birth trauma is, because I think I have always had sort of the understanding that it's the tearing and the blood and the this and the that, and it's more of the visual side of it. Can you, Lael, just sort of, for a lot of women out there that probably don't understand what birth trauma is and may have actually experienced birth trauma but don't know that they have. What does that look like?
Well, I think, as a top level statement, so to speak, birth trauma is really any space where a woman feels like she was traumatized through her birth experience, which can be through the pregnancy. It can be the care she receives in the pregnancy or, complications that happen. It can be the birth. It could equally be in that postnatal phase as well. And birth trauma looks like many different things to many different people. Birth trauma can be not getting an epidural in time. Birth trauma can be actually having an epidural and thinking that they didn't want one. Birth trauma can be tearing. It can be having a cesarean. It can be actually an emergency in birth. It can be not feeling supported by your partner through labour. It can be obstetric violence, and being treated really poorly. It can be, a lot of women I've worked with have had birth trauma purely because they didn't have an understanding of what the birthing process was actually like. They didn't do any education. So then when they got into the actual birth, they went into so much shock because of what was happening in their body and they didn't understand. Birth trauma can be a cascade of interventions. We start with one thing that leads to the next, then leads to the next. That can cause a lot of birth trauma. Birth trauma actually can be many, many things. And I've heard, when I first actually started working in birth, I really wanted to know what made for good birth, a positive birth for women, because I'd had a tricky first birth experience and then a really second powerful birth experience.
Yeah, I was going to ask what were
So I wanted to know kind of what it was that really made that difference between feeling good about your birth and not. So when I first started working in birth, I went and interviewed hundreds of women on their birth stories. And this was, I would rock up at the park and there'd be another woman and I'd just walk up to her and go, hey, I'm just kind of collecting research. Do you want to tell me about your birth? And I have my note paper and pen. Every single woman wanted to tell me about her birth, every single woman. And I heard hundreds of stories. And what was so fascinating to me was there was one woman who would tell a story that was like, yeah, I got induced for every birth and it was amazing and I love my births. And, by the fourth baby, they didn't have time to induce me. The baby just slipped out. And I'm sitting there listening, they cut me each time. It was fine. And I'm sitting there like, oh, that sounds horrific, right? But she thought her births were amazing. And then I had another woman who I would have perceived to have an amazing birth, which she had this water birth at home and it was this and that, yet she held heaps of trauma because of something that happened in the birth. So I began to see that it's not so much, again, can around what actually happens. It's how our perception of what happens, and it also, more than anything, and this is what I really learned over the years of working with trauma, is that it usually is just sitting on top of other trauma that sits underneath. So, if we have traumatic experiences in our lives, if we have big stories that are around not being heard or not being listened to or being abandoned or not feeling like we are strong or powerful, all those kind of things, well, often they will turn up in the birth space. And that's often where we see trauma start to
play out.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a huge topic. And I think it really does come back to nobody can say whether, we think you've had birth trauma or not. It really is about what you perceive to be true, what it felt like for you. Sometimes the trauma is just being out of control, which is, we're not used to that as women. And so I think over all the years and listening to many, many women's stories, it can be anything. And it's a bit of a puzzle, when we look at all the different pieces that come together for a woman's birth. And, they'll be able to tell you often which is the part that you keep thinking about, which is the part that really holds the charge for you. And it will be often around something like they didn't listen to me, or I didn't have any idea what was going on, or no one gave me the information I needed, or, just the story often unfolds, which is usually bigger than the birth.
Is there generally, Lael, a common theme that you found working with women over a period of time? Was there sort of a regular thing that you were finding that, yep, okay, every woman is coming to me with this sort of similar situation? Or
one of the biggest themes I think that turns up in birth trauma all the time is women not being able to stand in their power. So a lot of the time it's women, and we see this a lot with first births, is women turning up to their first birth as the good girl. Yeah. So, those younger parts of us that want to be liked and want to do the right thing.
So me.
And yeah, that was totally me as well. And that want to, want it to go well, but actually often are not standing in that fear center that says a no to something, or they're sitting in a lot of fear and can't find that trust within themselves, or they're choosing care providers that kind of treat them like the little girl version of themselves, and that's how it plays out. So I think one of the biggest themes I've seen is definitely women not being able to find or access the power and the strength within them to actually have very clear no's around what they want, or to make choices that feel in alignment with who they really are. And unfortunately, and I wish it didn't have to be this way, but unfortunately I see a lot of women have really tricky first births. They go through that trauma, and then hopefully they do the work to make different choices second time round, and that second birth can be incredibly powerful and healing for them. So it's, I think, in our particular present day culture, because we're actually so disconnected from birth, as I think a culture and where we are sitting today, we're actually really disconnected from our bodies, from our power, our innate strength, all that kind of stuff, that a lot of women go into this first birth as this rite of passage and actually sometimes come out the other side, with trauma and learning a lot about who they are. And I think it is because we're not informed about birth in the way we need to be. We don't see our sisters and our cousins and the village give birth. We still have this Hollywood idea of what we're shown on television of what birth should be, and we often go into that, and we're often then taught to care more about the pram we have or what our nursery looks like, as opposed to this powerful rite of passage experience that can set up that postpartum phase and also then your journey into motherhood.
Yeah, sorry, Jess, I'm just full of questions right now. I suppose, that really speaks to my first experience. Was your first experience similar in that, that sort of not knowing, being the good girl? Like, I know I was like, well, I have to have an obstetrician, and I'd have to go to hospital, and these were all, it's such a good phrase that you've coined there, that, the good girl, because that was just so me. Was your first experience not similar, but your own experience to that, and then your subsequent births sort of informed that empowering within you?
For me, my first experience, I think I probably wasn't sitting in the good girl part of I have to tick the boxes was what was right. I was sitting in complete naivety. So I was 24 when I was pregnant, right? Like I was a baby. Like that's nearly how old my child is now, right?
Yeah.
So, and my husband was like, yeah, let's have a baby. It'd be great. Like I read maybe half a book. That was it. Like I went in blind. And my philosophy was how hard can it be? It'll just be a day. And so what I was going to do, I was going to burn oils. And that was going to save me. So that was
bless.
Yeah. I was going to burn essential oils. I have my nice music. My mum was going to be there. She'd had 3 cesareans, so she had no idea. She'd never been in labour before. My best mate was there who didn't
Were
even
you
really.
at home?
No, we were going to the birth centre back when they had birth centres. My best friend was going to come. She didn't even really know what a uterus was, I don't think. So like she didn't have kids. Like we were literally the blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
And really the trauma that came from my son's experience was lack of information, lack of education. So, I pre-laboured for days, didn't rest, didn't eat, like stayed up all night, all those kind of things, and then ended up at the hospital on the 3rd day just like exhausted. And they're like, well, we can induce you. Didn't know what that meant, but I just ended up going, yep, okay, then we'll have a baby. And so then, of course, I get induced. I wasn't prepared for what those contractions are like. I said I want to do it naturally because I was like a hippie at heart, but I didn't even really know what that meant or what it took. And then I was begging for the epidural, and then the epidural game didn't work, and then they had to do it again. And, and it was just one of those cascade of interventions, then end up with a vacuum extraction, episiotomy. And, my son came out and they put him on my chest, and I remember just thinking, what the just happened? And, I was kind of happy that I was a mum, but I was definitely in shock. And I would probably say I spent probably the first year of his life in shock. And every time I'd breastfeed him, I'd go to relive the birth again and again. And I know from speaking to so many women that's such a common thing. I'd try and play it over in my head, what had happened. I just wanted to talk about it all the time. Anyone would listen. I wanted to tell the story, which again now I realise is me trying to process trauma. I didn't know how to. All the while you're trying to figure out how to be a mum, right? And at 25, without a village and without any friends that had kids, it was hard. And I was still running my business at the time. So it was not a wholesome, nourishing postpartum.
The things we do first time round, like I started my business first time round, continued to run it as well. Like it must be this first time thing.
Yeah,
There's always pregnant people bloody renovating or starting businesses or.
And I think again, we're probably not exposed to what it really is about. I think we're still in the Hollywood version of what having a baby is and playing house and birth and those kind of things. And it really, I think when I got pregnant with my second child, I thought I'll go to a different hospital, it'll be different this time. So each time I'd go for a checkup, I'd start hyperventilating and my husband would be like, I think you've got some trauma. And I'd be like, yeah, I think so. And that's when I actually went and did some debriefing and realised what was missing from that first experience. And really, for me, it was that continuity of care, it was education, information, all that kind of stuff. So I made different choices second time, had a home birth doctor and a midwife and had my second baby at home. And I'm one of those people that labours long and hard. Like my shortest birth was 19 hours. Like I don't do quick birth. I have to process every. Oh my God, it's like running a marathon. I have to process every feeling and emotion that's there existing in my body before I can have a baby. Like I cry and then I moan and complain, then I walk around and oh my God, it's epic. It's massive. It's I am so drunk. I'm like a 4-year-old having like a massive tantrum for days.
Did you beg to go to the hospital during your home birth?
Yeah. We were about to go and then my waters broke and then I was like, quick, there's the head, let's go. Everything. When I used to teach childbirth education, I'm like, there is nothing that you think that you're going to say that I haven't said. Like I wish I had video footage of it because I was like, it was painful. Anyway.
The Business of Being Born, the doco, The Business of Being Born, there's that doula.
Yeah. That's it, me. Yeah, this is horrible. Totally. But it was interesting that the moment I gave birth to Indy, my second child, and I held her in my arms, the feeling I had was this is how it's meant to feel.
Oh.
That feeling of euphoria, that feeling of power and strength. I had never felt so powerful in my whole life, ever. It was like
I know that feeling. You can do anything.
I can do anything. And again, I wanted to tell everybody because I was like, did you know what I just did? Like that was the most epic thing ever. And that really ignited this fire in me of like, I want women to have that experience. And so that's kind of what got me working in birth. And then interestingly, my third baby was really the doozy, right? So by that time, you know, it was 5 years later that I had her. I'd been working in birth. I was a doula. I was teaching calm birth. I was probably actually a little bit arrogant, I think. Yeah, I was. And I really was like, if you do all of this and you do the work, then you'll have the birth you want. And so for my third baby, I was like, right, not just a home birth. I'm going to go up the bush to my mum's place in the country and have the baby on the land. Like I was like, we're going to have the full hippie experience.
Free birth or?
No, I had a midwife.
Yeah.
But, and what was really interesting is in that third pregnancy, I remember saying, and this is possibly one of the stupidest things to ever say, so don't anybody ever say this, but I actually said, I want this birth experience to show me the woman I am. That's what I asked for.
That's a big message to the universe, Lael.
Yeah, it is. And boy, did I get it.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I thought in my mind, show me the woman I am would mean like roaring my baby out, you know, on the land and whatever. Well, that didn't happen. So what happened is we went up to the bush, waited. I'm pregnant for freaking 42 for so long, and baby didn't come, and so we went back to Melbourne, and we're waiting. Finally, go into labour, and ring my midwife. She comes over. You know, I'm contracting. It just feels wrong. I keep saying, doesn't feel right. There's something different here. I keep saying to her over and over again, I feel like my cervix is bubbling. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, she comes over, checks me out, and she's like, I think your baby's breech. And I'm like, no. She's like, we need to go to the hospital. So we transferred to the hospital, and sure enough, had an ultrasound, and there was my little footling breech baby, which I somehow don't know how I did not pick that up. But anyway, you just kind of. And then I was like, wow, so here we are faced with this other thing, I'd birthed my babies vaginally before. The hospital's like, you should have a cesarean. I was like, no, I want to try and give it a go.
Oh, wow.
There was a lot of pushback from the hospital, but I had a really strong team. I knew what I was doing. And I was like, no, I need to give this a go. So then for the next day and a half, I laboured and did everything I knew to try and, to bring her down and to birth. I mean, I did everything. I was like up and down flights of stairs. And for someone who does not like exercise, it's this torturous. My doula's like 5 more steps, and I just want to punch her out. Anyway, I did everything I could, and then I finally went, I think after 36 hours or something, I'm like, I know enough to know that when breech babies happen, they're usually pretty straightforward if it's going to go well. Mm-hmm. There's nothing straightforward about this. So I can only presume that this baby wants to be born by cesarean. And it was a really powerful experience because it was me who actually decided to do it, not being told from the hospital 36 hours earlier, you need to have a cesarean. It was really me going, no, I've done all I can now, because I know if I had have had that Caesar earlier, I would have gone, well, maybe I could have birthed her. Yeah. And, I had to do it for myself. And that was the power. The power was actually going, I've got to find this and do it. So then we're like, all right, let's have a cesarean. I was like, right, we're going to make this the most beautiful cesarean ever. We're going to have a lotus birth. It's going to be beautiful. We're all excited. And as we're waiting to go to theatre, I feel this urge to push, and her foot comes out.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I'm like, what? Maybe she doesn't want to be born by cesarean. And I'm like, okay. So then we're pushing, but then I'm saying to my midwife, it doesn't feel right. Like, I don't know. And then I'm like, nah, we need to go to theatre. So it was pretty full on.
Wow.
Anyway, we raced to theatre. And by this time it kind of turned into a bit of this is probably not ideal that her foot's hanging out and we don't know if she's going to come out. Like, we need to get the baby out. So she was fine the whole time. Baby was fine. We get to theatre, and, when you're having an emergency cesarean where it is a bit of an emergency, it's pretty full on. And your natural reaction is to go into shock, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, all right, we're having the baby, let's do it. And I'm really, really sensitive to drugs. And as soon as they gave me the spinal, I just crashed. And so then they had to cut the baby out, and that became the emergency. So my baby was born and she wasn't breathing. And so they had to resuscitate her for nearly 10 minutes, which was pretty massive. And so, she was born, and they're saying to me, it doesn't look good for her. And I'm like, all of a sudden sitting there going, what the f have I done? Like, where is this at, right? So then I have the cesarean. It's all fine. They stitch me up. They take the baby away. I'm going to my husband, go with the baby, and they wouldn't even let him come. They're like, this is quite severe. So they basically took the baby to the NICU and they had to intubate her and put her in an induced coma because they're like, she's been without oxygen for a long time. We think that this is, we're not sure how this is going to go. So it was one of those experiences where all of a sudden – you're tracking along going, okay, yeah, I'm making decisions. This feels good. This is where it is. And then it just switches in that way. So that night, she was born about 4 p.m. That night, the doctors come down and, I am drugged because you've had a cesarean and I'm probably still in shock. And they're saying to me, look, she's not great and we don't know if she'll make it through the night. And if she does, she'll probably have pretty severe brain damage. And so I am there in that hospital bed just going, okay, like this is where we're at. And what was really, and this is probably the most powerful experience I've ever had in my life. So then my husband, who's been up for 3 days birthing, is passed out on the floor. I am sitting there thinking, this is the defining moment that you have in life where you really learn about surrender. Mm-hmm. And even though I was drugged and couldn't move off the bed, I metaphorically got down on my knees and it's like I surrendered and went, I let go. Whatever's meant to happen here, I have to surrender to this. And I remember so clearly just completely going, I don't know what is happening with life here, but I have to trust that there is a bigger picture for this. So I remember just letting go. And then I think I was crying. I was really emotional and this midwife came in to check on me and she said, are you okay? And I said, and this is the part that probably gets me every time. I said to her, I'm waiting for them to come and tell me that my baby's about to die. And she's like, have you seen your baby? I said, no. And she said, right, we're going to take you to your baby. And when I get interviewed all the time and one of the questions I get asked is, has a stranger ever done you something, a beautiful act of kindness or something? And I always think about this midwife. I don't know who she was, but I feel like she saved my life that night because she's like, this is going to hurt, but we're going to take you to see your baby. And so she got me in the wheelchair and she took me up to see my baby who's like, and I remember touching my little Tali and I said to her, if you need to go, you can go. Like I trust you. I trust whatever you need to do. I'm going to hand this over. And so then I came back down and then in the morning my husband woke up. I mean, he'd kind of been around with all of this as well. And I said, please go and check on her. And we both had this feeling if she made it through the night, she'll be all right. So he went and checked her and he came down and she's like, she's still here. And I was like, okay. And then I just moved into, right, here's the opportunity where you either buy into the fear or you choose to trust. Mm-hmm. And I went, right, this is about trust. I have to let go and see her as well and healthy and doing whatever she needs to do. And, the doctors kept coming in and they kept saying, oh, this is bad. And before they'd even say anything, I'd go, before you tell me anything, is she okay? And they'd go, she's stable for now. And I'd go, great, now tell me what you want to hear. Yeah. So then I could hear it and I would, be listening and they're saying, you do get the severity of this. And I'm like, yeah. And then they would say things like, she could have brain damage. And I was like, that's okay. And they're like, how do you know it's okay? Now, what is the biggest blessing is our best friends had a son, who he has passed now, who had cerebral palsy and had severe brain damage. And we had spent maybe 15 years of life with them and with Oscar. And I knew what that life looked like. We did every holiday with them. And I was like, that's okay. I know what that life is. It's hard, but it's also okay. And I'm like, I'm going to just trust and let go. So after a few days, they take her off the cooling mats and take her out of the coma and they cannot believe that she's breathing on her own. And then they're doing all these tests. And I'll never forget the head fellow of the Royal Women's Hospital came to me and he said, in my 30 years of medicine, I have never seen a baby recover like this. And I was like, yeah. So then after 10 days, we took her home and there was nothing wrong with her. And I came out the side of the other side of that experience going, yeah, so I asked for that experience to show me the woman I was.
Next time I make a declaration, I'm just going to think about that.
So I used to then say to women in birth, I go, just ask for simple. Like, when you're writing a birth plan, simple and uncomplicated is what you want to go for, right? None of this powerful, I want to be, So that experience, which was life-changing, and definitely then put me on a path of understanding trauma, because from her journey, when I brought her home, I knew enough about birth and about trauma to know that that's a big trauma for her as a baby, and it was a big trauma for me. And I was like, how are we going to heal this? And that's actually when I discovered the work of Dr. Aletha Salter and aware parenting, and began to understand that babies can heal from trauma, and so can we. And that's what actually then set me off on that whole other path of healing and learning. And, it wasn't easy. I had to go through my own journey and story of PTSD with that. I kind of went into survival, 3 kids, navigating everybody. And then about a year later or so, that's when kind of I started to have those symptoms of PTSD. And again, that was the greatest gift, because it actually taught me about healing and about trauma. And I had to go into every deep part of myself to heal it. And as I tell this story now, which I know is a big story to tell, I would not change one single part of that story. Yeah, it was the biggest gift of my life.
That saying, you don't get the birth you want, you get the birth you need.
Yeah.
I just couldn't stop thinking of that the whole time you were telling that story, because look at what's growing from that.
Totally. Well, all my life's work has grown from that experience. Yeah. And then it was really fascinating, as I was still working in birth at the time, I seemed to keep attracting women that either would have their babies might pass, it was stillborns, or babies born early, or there was, babies that needed open heart surgery, or I think because I'd been through that, I was like, I can sit in this space. It does not scare me. I know how big and heavy it is, but I believe that there can be beauty and grace in all these things. And so then I did a lot of work with women that had that, and then trauma, and it was the greatest gift for me, that birth experience. And she is now a very sassy 15-year-old who is so smart and switched on. And, I look at her and go, your birth pretty much just sums up you. Like it's her to a T. Yeah. And I'm like, and I feel like that was kind of the journey she chose, and it taught me more about myself and birth than anything I could have possibly learned.
Incredible.
Thank you so much, Lael. That was I'm really grateful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, because you're right. It is a heavy story, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of women out there that it resonates with, or can relate, or have experienced similar in their own journey. So thank you. Next episode, we're going to talk about your work and all the beautiful things that you do. So thank you.
Thanks.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, homb.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Homb Postpartum.